And that's one thing that I learned in spades, hunting that public land up in northern Wisconsin, was don't advertise your spots. Not just about how I get there. Do not park in front of the where you're going to hunt. It sounds ridiculous. People say you're crazy. I'd park a mile away. I'd have somebody drop me off. I don't want anybody to know. And that might sound paranoid. It's only paranoid if you don't, if you want people to know where you're hunting and you want to screw up that spot.
It is not. If it's paranoia, meet paranoia.
Right there.
I'm quite certain that the overwhelming majority of viewers already know what I'm about to say. And that is, most of what you see on TV is a darn fantasy. We're not going to pummel public grounds, spending, for me personally, it takes me an average of 3 years to kill one 3.5+ deer on public grounds. And I've hunted them in many, many different states. Okay. You can't make television shows that way. So, very few, if any, are actually filmed in those types of settings. What you see instead are people hunting utopias, people going and there's nothing wrong with what I'm about to say one darn bit. If there is, hey, color me wrong, because haven't done the outfitted hunts, but I sure manage the heck out of properties. If you manage properties, if you go on outfitted hunts, that's what you're seeing on TV. You're very rarely seeing the public ground stuff. There is a tremendous, tremendous difference between the tactics that work on Utopia, virtually everything, and the tactics that work on heavily pressured whitetails, whether it's public or private land. Luckily, we have Dan Schmidt with us today. So Dan Schmidt, please share with us you don't have to hammer the differences between public and Utopia because you also hunt both, but what are some of the things that you've picked up on that you just plain cannot do on public land that you do all the time on Utopia?
About everything. I hunted public land, started off hunting public land when I was a kid. Now, I think there's two, and did it for 25 years. There's two separate camps here. There's the types of guys today that I see, especially on social media. And gals. There's the ones that want to go out and kill that 3.5-year-old buck on public land. Good luck. I always say.
I agree.
That's good, good if you can do it. But I see there's this almost tainted mentality like, oh yeah, these guys are doing it, and this so-and-so group on YouTube is doing it all the time. They're probably hunting not the Chequamegon National Forest, where I grew up hunting, or the Nicolay National Forest, or some of these state lands that I grew up hunting. They're hunting good land or good public land in states with deer.
If you don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you there for 1 second. Having hunted all sorts of public land in Illinois, having hunted public land in Iowa, having hunted public land in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Alberta, every public ground is not created equally.
That's right.
There are some places that I hunted on public ground that I'll tell you what, they aren't that much different than the utopias that I hunt, in that there are a decent number of mature bucks in that area. We are talking about pressured whitetails here. Alberta's crown land, that's not pressured. It is. By wolves, not by us. They're afraid of wolves, not people there.
So going back to so there's two camps. There's that camp. There's the other camp, which I grew up in. The other camp was, we're hunting public land because we don't have access to private land, and we just don't want to see other guys. And we just want to be able to go hunt and maybe come home with a deer. Now, those are the ones that I speak to the most because that's how I grew up. And I think if you look at America as a melting pot, the people who hunt public land most fall into that. They want to go hunting. They don't have access to private, and they're like, I just want a reasonable chance to get a deer. They don't care what it is. They don't care if it's a 3.5-year-old
And there's
buck.
not a darn
Nothing
thing
wrong with that.
Not one thing, as long as it's a legal animal and it's taken ethically. If you got a
100%.
problem with it, go pound
I will
sand.
be the first one to congratulate them and want to hear the story. But to answer your question, everything's different. For me, for hunting public land, is all this fun stuff that we get to talk about mostly gets pushed off to the side. The one thing there's two things. One thing, entry and access points to those places that I'm going to hunt. And I'm going to get to that in a second.
And the key to that is because if they know you're hunting them, you're hosed.
Well, that's part of it. And the second part is scent control, which we talk about a lot. But the first one is, if they know that they're being hunted, you're hosed. If I let other hunters know where I'm hunting, I'm hosed.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I learned in spades, hunting that public land up in northern Wisconsin, was don't advertise your spots. Not just about how I get there. Do not park in front of where you're going to hunt. It sounds ridiculous. People say, you're crazy. I'd park a mile away. I'd have somebody drop me off. I don't want anybody to know. And that might sound paranoid. It's only paranoid if you want people to know where you're hunting and you want to screw up that spot.
It is not, if it's paranoia, meet paranoia.
Right there. So the first thing we talk about, Steve, is not advertising your spots to deer and people. The other thing that really took me a long time to comprehend is I always said embrace the non-peak plan, because the typical routine, you got to be there early, you got to hunt till it's dark, and we've written about it and talked about it for years, like, oh, hunt the midday and up. That does work, especially on public land, but you got to know the land, and you got to understand that it's not like you're just turning on a spigot at between 10 and 2, and there's going to be all these. The thing is that buck might come through between 10 and 2, and you might have that chance, and you're not going to know it if you do that same thing of getting there half an hour before daylight and the hunting until 10 and then getting down, going for lunch. That's one. Let me finish. The second thing, and I learned this from John Eberhardt, and I think you probably wrote about it as well, really hard for me to understand was on a morning spot, on travel corridors, on public land, was I would get there insanely early, 2 hours before first light, and I would sit there, and I saw more deer that way. And somebody said, why in the world would you go out there 2 hours before first light? And I always said, here's the thing, and this really took me a long, because I wouldn't hunt. You know me, I can't hunt all day. I used to, can't do it anymore. But if I'm in there, let's just say, we talk about entry and exit routes. I get in there 2 hours before first light. I didn't bump anything. I got in that stand. Well, now a buck comes through an hour before first light. Well, how did that help me, somebody might say. Here's the thing.
You didn't spook it.
I did not spook it. He might have got up there, milled around, fed a little bit, and came back, and then I got the opportunity.
Whereas if you had came in with everybody else,
would have busted him out of there.
Bumping him out.
And would have never, ever seen him probably for the rest of the year.
Exactly.
And that was a hard thing for me to comprehend when hunting public land, was it's not 100%. It just because I got there 2 hours before first light doesn't mean I'm going to kill him. But it might have prolonged, and I killed him 2 weeks later, and probably why I didn't spook him that one time.
I'm here at the Dry Shot booth looking at the tried and true no-show Gusset XT boot. This is their ultimate cold weather boot for the deer hunter. It's got 5 millimeters of neoprene throughout, plus 2 millimeters extra around the foot. It has a bigger heel kick to get them off easier. It also has a special hydrocoat treatment over the neoprene so that no moisture can ever penetrate, get behind the other materials, and start to break down over time. To find out more about the boot, go to dryshotusa.com.